Because of lockdown, I've ended up sort of pivoting back to photography a little bit, for work, that is. There's one thing that I did, that I've done, that I do, that has made me a better photographer. Let's talk about that in today's episode of When Will I Learn? So one of the things that I think is a real shame is how infrequently people will print their photos now. You take a picture and the only time it ever gets seen is on a screen. You probably see it on a big screen, everyone else just sees it on a small screen because they're looking at it on Instagram. Which is fair enough, and pictures can look great on Instagram. Pictures often, really shine on there. But there's something to be said for printing your images. There's something about printing an image that makes it, this is a cliche, but it makes it feel more real. It shows up some things that you just don't notice when it's on a screen. But it should go further than that. So when I first got into photography, one of the things that I really liked, one of the things that I really enjoyed looking at was photography books. Books like this. This is my absolute favourite. This is a book called Architecture, and it's by a photographer called Hiroshi Sugimoto. Now, this is a very sort of special book to me because I really like architectural photography. I used to really, really enjoy black and white, and it's large format architecture, black and white, but also they're out of focus, and they're focused double infinity, which brings this together. All those things bring this together really coherently. That's why I love this book. I also really, really enjoy the work of Candida Hoffer, and I've got this book of hers, and I've got another one up there. But I really, really enjoy this one because, again, it's large format photography of architecture, specifically interiors of libraries in this one. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. Actually, one of the other things, back when I first got into photography magazines were what we turned to. In the same way now that you would jump on YouTube or you would go on like F-Stoppers or something like that, photography magazines used to be, because they were nicely subsidised by advertising, they used to be affordable and they were kind of everywhere because they were the main thing that people went to. You went to the local WH Smiths, you went to the local, even the corner shop would have maybe one kind or two kinds of photography magazine. So you got to see work printed all the time. And you also potentially would get a chance to have your work printed. You send it off and it ends up published. I really love magazines. I love the ones like Kinfolk, which focus on kind of having beautiful photography with nice design, and they print it on really nice paper, and you get to experience the photos as almost as they were meant to be experienced. This is basically a video about why you should make photography books. Now, like I said, printing a photo makes it real, but putting it in a book gives it context. Putting your photos together in a book means that you have to think about how they play together with each other. Having a printed portfolio is a great way to get work, but it's also just a great way to explore your craft. It'll also help to, I think, help your confidence when it comes to taking pictures. There's something about putting work together that raises it above the sum of its parts. And I have been making books for quite a while. I've made a lot that are from print-on-demand companies, and I've also made a lot, actually handmade them, printed them, and bound them together. I don't have an awful lot of them still, but I've picked a little collection of ones that I do have. So this is the first one that I made. This is a blurb book. And Blurb is that company that does like really sort of affordable printing. Back a long time ago now, they did an offer where you could pull your images from Instagram and they would put them automatically in a book. And they did like a huge discount. And so I got my images from whenever I started on Instagram up until August 2012 printed in a book. And it's kind of ridiculous. So here's the first ever picture I took on Instagram. I remember this day. I was sat in a coffee shop in Huddersfield called Coffee Evolution. And I downloaded the app. And I was like, I don't understand this app. It's a pretty shitty photography app. And back then, you didn't really share pictures like that online. Maybe you would do them on Facebook. But not really. People kind of thought it was a bit weird. I downloaded it, I took that picture, obviously no one followed me, and I followed no one, and I just edited it and posted it on there. Then I filled this book. And this is not a good book. This is not a good book of pictures, but what it did do is it helped me see what I liked about pictures being printed. It helped me see the kind of things that I enjoyed. What I liked about photography. And it was the start of a bug that would that would stay until present day. I then, a couple of years later, I found myself applying for a photography master's. And I had to put together a portfolio. And unfortunately, I don't have the actual book that I made because it was stolen. But I made a book out of concrete and plywood, and it was bound together, and it had some beautiful photographic prints in there. I also made a backup copy that I could carry around a little easier, and the book was brought together under the sort of concept of, it was 3 projects that linked together, that each featured a different span of time, days, months or years, and 3 projects of varying timescales. And this is another Blurb book printed on slightly better paper. This is one I took a little, not more seriously, but I put a bit more effort into it. I put in an introduction. In this book there are 3 personal projects. Each has a different timescale from days to months to years. The one that reaches furthest back didn't start specifically as a photographic project, but it was where I learnt to love making images. I don't shoot exclusively in black and white, but these are personal projects and I enjoy black and white. I don't stick to one camera or one process. The images shown are created with film and digital on anything from medium format SLRs to the camera on my phone. I found there is often a correct tool for a specific purpose. And this was 3 projects that were inspired by quotes from architects. So first one, this was a short-term project called Junk Space, and it was inspired by Rem Koolhaas and his quote, "We abhor the utilitarian." And he has this theory of junk space, which is the space between usable architecture, and it's the utilitarian stuff. And so that's what this book was about. I printed an image and I titled it across from that, and this was a great way to have my film photography. So these were shot, can't remember what these were shot on actually. These are probably 35mm film. I used to have a Nikon, I think. And so these are pictures of junk space, and with names that. Oh, interestingly, so this was back when I was using expired film, and I was developing it with weird chemicals and processes that just weren't they just weren't the best. And so I kind of called them carelessly developed. The next project was the opposite of architecture, and that was inspired by a Frank Gehry quote, "Architecture should speak of its time and place, but yearn for timelessness." And so in this one, I actually shot these on one of the first runs of Impossible Polaroid film, which is extra interesting because a lot of these completely faded, and so the actual physical objects don't exist anymore. But this is a great way of kind of me realizing that you didn't just need to have beautifully pristine digital images to create a book. You could scan and enlarge things like Polaroids. Third one was for illustrative purpose only, inspired by an architect called Toyo Ito. Architects have made architecture too complex. We need to simplify it and use a language that everyone can understand. And these were images that I created over a number of years to go along with a blog that I used to write about architecture. And so this is a photograph that I took when I was traveling around Europe, me and an architect friend, taken on all sorts of things. This was taken to go along with the blog post, My Week with Fuji X100, so that would have been taken on my X100. This was taken on a Mamiya 645. I remember that camera well. I really liked it, but I ended up swapping it out for a Hasselblad 500cm. And this is one of the great things about creating a photo book. You can reference back to it, and you know that these are pictures that you had some specific feelings about. You know, you don't have to go rooting through an old hard drive, try and find images on there. It also really helps to think of the theory behind why you're taking pictures. It helps to understand what it is that you want to photograph, and not so much in a literal sense, but in a conceptual sense. Understanding the rationale behind taking pictures is really important. Even if you don't necessarily share that explicitly with words, understanding it yourself will really help. During my masters, I got a little bit more experimental. I created this book. And this is a book that I actually made myself, printed and bound and created the cover. And this is actually a bit of felt that I will talk about as I get into this book. This is called Gallery, A Study of Context and Materiality. And it's a look at the Manchester Metropolitan University's gallery space. It looks at it in a couple of studies, 4 studies I think. The gallery is a gallery, which shows the gallery in its usual use case with work in there. And I was interested in how people were using the space, being informed by the work that was in there, the signage and the architecture, because that's what I was looking at when I did my masters. I was looking at documenting how people use architecture. And so I took these photos in there, and I started putting words with them. I started putting quotes with them. I started putting my own words with them. Usually just things that were observational. These were actually, I think, 4x5 shots. And these were taken with the context removed. So these were taken in the gallery when work had come down before new work had gone up. And so I was looking at the space when it was devoid of the context that it had. In the Holden Gallery, devoid of any exhibition, all that remains is a void carved from time. Time has layered and altered this space. There is evidence of this apparent in the makeup of the walls. You can see in the surface of the floor that this space is in use. Time stacks up layers of evidence. Navigating a space that has had its flow, albeit a transitory and imaginary one, removed, gives an interesting view of our ignorance of architecture. How does one navigate and ultimately experience an interior or exterior that doesn't provide you with any input? There is no diagram for how one should experience an empty gallery. You can experience the same phenomenon on a different scale when you move house or decorate. You can kind of see how this is starting to evolve into the sort of more poetic stuff that I get into. This is not something you have to do. You don't have to start writing poetry and documenting every thought, but this helps give context to a series of images. And I think this ability to rationalize why you're doing it makes for a better photographer. And so this goes on, it looks at the gallery empty, it looks at it from different points of view. Remove all the furniture and the items from your home, every trinket or ornament. Take away the TV and the sofa and leave no armchair or stool. Your house will still be the same building. It is architecturally intact, but it has had its context removed. No longer do you enter the lounge, point away from the sofa and towards the TV. No longer do you have to circumnavigate the dining table to get to the dresser. The chance that you will stare at the ceiling in your bedroom, as you have done for years, is now slim to none. I start getting a little bit more poetic. And then in the 4th study, I look at the detritus, the things that are left behind. I look specifically at objects that were used to give the gallery context, but are ultimately not in use anymore and are just rubbish now. And that's actually, this piece of fabric is what this book is bound with. So it's getting quite esoteric and getting quite experimental with creating these books. But that is something that might happen if you start creating books. You might come to love it. You might come to use it as a medium in itself. And these are the kind of photographs that make almost no sense in a world where you don't print stuff and you don't give stuff context, because they're not inherently beautiful. Some photography is inherently beautiful. This is not necessarily that. And this is possibly my favourite book. It actually has some magnets mounted in the back so that it would stick to a piece of work that I did. But I don't know if you can see this. The cover has like a recessed circle in it, and when that's got book cloth over it, it gives like a little debossed circle, which I really, really love. And this is a book that ultimately didn't get used, but this went along with my master's thesis, my final exhibition. And this is where I started using book as a medium more than I was using photography as a medium, and it got a little bit too far gone. But I really love this book. I loved making it, and I like what it reminds me of, and it is an object that I will treasure in a very different way to the digital images, which I have no clue where they are. They're probably on a hard drive somewhere. Hopefully they're backed up, but I'm not that sure if they are. And then as a little bit of a wild card, back when I used to do wedding photography, and another reason why you should maybe make some books with your images is because it will help sell your work. And this was a book which cost me far too much money, but it also made me money. And it is a book that I compiled of a load of weddings that I'd shot up to this point, and it's a beautiful book which I have kind of no use for anymore, but it's a studio sample from a company called Folio, and they do beautiful prints and then they bind them into a beautiful book, and I still have the protective sheets between the pages because I want it to last as long as possible, not because I'm going to sell wedding photos anymore, but because I like it as an object. It's wrapped like cereal in a bag and in a box. So hopefully it's clear that I have a bit of a love for books, especially photography books. But just because I love them so much doesn't mean that I'm like biased to how useful they are. Making photography books and making printed portfolios seems a little archaic, but it will, I guarantee it will make you a better photographer. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, there is a button for that, and if you're not already subscribed, go ahead and do so. What can it hurt? You can always unsubscribe later. I'll see you next time. Bye guys.